So let's start out with what needs to be rethought about gratitude.
Yeah, it's not something many of us have probably thought a lot about. Um, and I don't think if it weren't for some of the experiences that have led me to understand some of this, that I'd be in any different boat. But the short of it, we're taught very well as children the need to thank. We are taught so much that we have to say thank you. We've all seen the mom or the dad in the store and trying to tell their kid someone did something for you. What do you say? What do you say? And we beat that into our kids, and we've all had it beaten into us. But very few of us along the way have ever really been taught how to be genuinely grateful. Um, and that may sound accusatory. I am not saying that the gratitude that we're giving is wrong. I'm not saying, I mean, in the book, I say that there are myriad vinyl stickers, blog posts, catchy phrases. There's so much around gratitude. There's so many scientific studies around gratitude that show its value. Um, and I'm not trying to take away from that foundation as much as it's just there's a need, just like everything else God has given us. He wants us to develop it, He wants us to grow it. And there's not a lot that shows us how to do that. For me, it started clear back in high school. And I don't think I fully grasped it clear back in high school, but I've been away from high school for a number of years. But when I was in my junior year, my mom ended up with breast cancer. And watching her still be a mom, watching her do things that no one going through chemo has any business doing, had an effect on me. And there was one night specifically, I had been out with friends, um, didn't go as well as I wanted. I ended up walking home, and the habit, the tradition when I got home was to just check in with mom and dad. And there was an armchair by my mom's bed. She was in bed. She'd been through about 6 months of chemo at this point. And I sat in the chair and told her how horrible my life was, because this and that and the other. And I was just completely blind to this decrepit person sitting in front of me and how horrible her life was. Um, but in walking home through some dusty fields, my contacts were bothering me. And so I took my hand and I just started rubbing my eyes. And I was doing that for the duration of the conversation. I was just sitting there rubbing my eyes and just telling mom how horrible things were. And I don't know how she did it. I don't know how she slipped past me. But a few moments later, I felt her touch my knee. And I opened my eyes to see my mom kneeling in front of me with a bowl of water and a washcloth. And she had, even though chemo had ravaged her, she had seen a need that she knew she could fill. And she took off my sandals and she washed my feet. And as you can see, I mean, decades later, I can't get through that story. I can't share that without feeling that moment. And there are so many things I've learned because of that experience. But one of the biggest things I realized from it was I had spent years thinking I was a good kid and that I was grateful, that I said thanks when I was supposed to say thanks. I could check that box. I was a grateful person. And just seeing her, she was more frail than she's ever been. Um, it was work. It was hard for her to do what she did. And it wasn't ceremonious. It was just a moment of a mom caring for her child. But in that moment, I all of a sudden saw the cost of mothering in general, the cost of not just during her years of cancer, but all the years since and all the years before that. The unseen. There was so much that I realized that I never ever saw, so much that she went through. And um, my message is all about helping people not have to have someone go through cancer before they get it. Um, my connection with my mom changed in that moment. Our relationship is special, it's sacred, not just because she did something, but because that something opened my eyes to something else. And um, I just, I realized, like we've already said, that we're taught the need to thank, but there's a lot that people are missing out on in a world full of lonely, unheard people. We have the power to make some change. We have the power to help. And in doing that, we also have the power to connect with people more deeply ourselves and to be blessed by it. And so I know there are myriad messages about gratitude. I don't mean to try and one up any of them. They're all important. But I do think that there's a hole that hasn't been filled. And I feel the need to help people with that because of the change that it's made in my life and the lives of others that I've worked with on it. So
That was an incredibly touching, moving story. Um, I could feel your emotions too. And so, with rethinking gratitude and how that story really changed you,
mhm.
and it's going to be changing me with how it moved me. Um, how do we measure the depth of gratitude? And
um again, because it's not 100% new ground, but it was new ground for me, trying to figure out, how do I in a book tell people, we could increase gratitude? How do you know if you've arrived at that goal? I don't think we ever completely arrive at that goal, but I in thinking it through and spending just some time in that silence, um I believe there are two things that maybe limit our gratitude currently. um and the one of them is ego. The fact that we are trained about the importance of saying gratitude, or offering gratitude, the fact that it is something that has, because we weren't given a great instruction booklet to go along with it, is just a checkbox. We get really well, or we do really well at saying it and doing it and counting that as enough. And in a lot of cases it is. What I'm talking about, I don't think will apply to people in every single situation. If I'm in a restaurant and someone helps me out, I don't think it would hurt, but I don't think I need to spend a ton of time on how I thank them. I need to be sincere in how I thank them. But in my key relationships, in the relationships that matter most to me, um, if all I'm doing is giving a thanks because I'm supposed to give a thanks, there's a problem. And so uh, I work with people on figuring out how to move from ego into empathy driven gratitude. And then the other element of it, I actually, I should have prepared a slide. I don't know if we're doing slides or not, but uh, I use a quadrant, and on the one axis is ego over to empathy, and then on the other axis is simply depth of gratitude. And it's not like a normal quadrant, because normal quadrants, there are titles and conditions in all of the boxes. But the thing that I found, um, when I don't apply empathy to gratitude, it tends to be shallow. And when I do apply empathy to gratitude, it naturally tends to move itself. But I find most of us, we aren't ingrates. We don't sit in a quadrant where we aren't giving thanks. but because ego's involved, I mean, the metaphor I use in the book is an idea of preparing a bouquet of balloons for somebody and going to the work of finding out their favorite color and finding out their favorite flower or that sort of thing to go together and so on, and arranging this bouquet of balloons, but not inflating the balloons before you give it to them.
Mm,
And not realizing that they aren't inflated, right? Um,
that's a really good metaphor.
It
Um,
really is. Yeah, that's
it
like very
really good.
visual. You're like, oh, oh. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I was also thinking with some of the things you've been saying is with the empathy is you feel when you're really feeling gratitude, you feel it here in the heart.
mhm.
And where love comes through very deeply.
Yes. Yes. Well,
And
and
that
where love comes through deeply, I think the real kicker, is my gratitude deep enough or not, is have I gotten past the message I'm trying to communicate? Am I spending my effort in thanking you, trying to convince you that I'm a grateful person, even though none of us consciously think that? Or am I putting myself aside, taking ego completely out of it, and helping you feel valued?
and
Ooh, I
And it's a
love
probably
subtle
have,
difference,
yeah.
but
And maybe when you also put ego aside, you become real.
yes, yes. Um, I also talk in the book a little bit about the idea of exercise routines. I don't know if either of you have had it happen, but I know I have followed some exercise and diet routines strictly and not seen the results I wanted. And it's
Absolutely.
frustrating. It's
Yeah.
frustrating to put in the effort and have nothing come of it. Um, and I don't know that any of us give thanks specifically so something can come of it. And if we do, maybe we're approaching that wrong as well. But as much as I've titled the book, It's Not About You, the amazing thing is when you learn to deepen gratitude and give it in a way that actually moves the other person, your connection with them will automatically change and you reap benefits because of that. And like you say, suddenly you're there. You take the ego out of it and suddenly you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great thought.
I love that. I really liked when you talking about the story with your mom about how that moment and then the moments, after that. And then part of it is just becoming from a child to a teenager to an adult. I get this as a
Yes.
natural progression, but all of a sudden you realize all the unseen things. And, when you were saying that, I was like, oh, yeah, I so appreciate my mother so much more now that I've been a mother a long time, but once I became
Right.
a mother, all of a sudden you realize like all of the things that she did for you and sacrificed and things that she
Mhm.
probably didn't really want to do, but she did. So
Right.
the unseen.
Well,
Yeah.
and I hear that in the same way I feel about the experience that I had with my mom. There's nothing that's going to replace what I can learn from the experience myself. As a parent, I have so much more gratitude for what my parents did for me. Absolutely. But are there ways of not having to wait until then? Are there ways for someone who doesn't have children to still be able to open their eyes differently and see people? Um, in fact, that brings to mind a quote by I don't know if I'm allowed to have my phone out during class or not, but
Oh, yes.
um, Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers,
Oh,
said,
Great.
I believe that appreciation is a holy thing, that when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time. So, in loving and appreciating our neighbor, we're participating in something sacred.
that
That
is a
was a
beautiful quote.
great. Yeah.
And I think in that light, as I learn to deepen my gratitude and take ego out of it, and like you said, actually be me and show up as me, as I inflate the balloon, all of this sudden, there's truth in my expression of gratitude. And when truth is being expressed, it allows God to confirm it differently.
Mm.
And so if I give thanks that are genuine and sincere because I've done the homework, because I have put that work in to see that other person more fully. And I say homework, and it makes it sound like it's a big, tough exercise. It's not. But if I am willing to do that work and make sure that I've flipped that switch and that I'm in that mode, um, all of a sudden, I'm not just conveying thanks, I'm conveying God's love. And I
I
mentioned
love
earlier,
that.
lonely souls. I mentioned people who feel unheard. Um, this bridges that gap in ways that nothing else really can. So,
Um,
Well, I have always loved saying thank you to like the cash register or thank you to all these people, but I want to take it deeper when I say thank you now that I'm saying it more from the heart.
okay.
That's something I'm grabbing from you right now, a
Well,
tidbit.
and I mentioned the person serving your food in a restaurant.
Right,
There is a, I want to say it's probably Buddhist, but I don't know for sure. There's a belief that what you are in one thing, you are in all things.
right.
And so rather than focusing so much on how you say thanks to people, because that can still end up being a very ego driven activity potentially, um, I work with people, like I said, on working with their key relationships. And so if you in those relationships that weigh the most, that matter most, are able to put this into practice, then it will still have an effect on every thanks that you give, on every time that you offer gratitude.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
Well,
so
these,
I don't
go
want to
ahead.
get too far ahead of I don't want to get too far ahead because I know you have like a workshop, you have more stuff to share. But
uh-huh.
can you maybe share just like one tip of, so when people leave this, it's like, okay, I want to do that, but how? Like, is there
Okay.
a
Um,
I know we didn't talk about this, so I'm throwing throwing this out to you without
yeah,
any
and
prep.
and I mean the workshop walks through it, and I don't
Okay.
know that I keep what I do in the workshop a secret. Hey, you can only have this if you show up at my workshop. But the workshop is a great opportunity to walk through it together, because I have seen people take just the worksheet and fill in all the blanks and go, I don't know that I'm there yet, and as a coach, part of my job is to help walk you through, are you really there yet or not? And if you haven't done the reps, how do we get the effort to, you know, to actually get the result? But it really comes down to, I've kind of hinted at it already. It comes down to understanding cost. Um, if I look at the key relationships in my life, actually, what I start with in the workshop is, what are your key roles? And as I look at the key roles in my life, who are the key relationship in those roles? Who are the key people that support me, that help me accomplish that role? Um, what has it actually cost for them to be there? And that can be a husband seeing more fully their wife, which I think is needed in this world. Um, it can be a parent more fully seeing their child. Sometimes we give them a task list and chores, and why aren't you doing this well? And wait, they're 5 and they've done it at the best of their ability. And if there's a lack, it's probably that I didn't help teach them. It really is empathy. And that makes it sound so simple. And we all have heard so much in the past years about vulnerability and empathy, that maybe it just sounds like I'm ringing the same bell as everybody else. But just spending some time really not looking at, do they do it the way I want? Do they not do it the way I want? But just simply the result that I'm getting, what is that costing them? And really putting time into that. When you see someone who's super skilled at anything, there's more time put in than you think there has been. And we sometimes get jealous of other people even and go, it just comes so naturally to them. No, no, it doesn't. They've put in that time. And if I can learn to value them for that time, um, it's the difference between thanking someone at work for the effort they've put in. Hey, thanks for doing that. And going, hey, I have been watching and I see that while everyone else does it this way, you do that one little extra bit. I appreciate that. I see you. And I know that that didn't just come in this moment, but that's part of your character. That's something you've built in. And I see that.
I love it. I think that is actually helpful. I
That
like
was.
investing, or anyway, it gives me things to think about for sure.
Cool. Very cool. Um, as we're talking about that, the other thought that comes to mind that I think is possibly the most important thought in all of this is, how does this apply to our relationship with God? We live in a world that has so much noise, so many distracting voices. And I think, especially those of us who are religious, um, we have some God in our lives. And compared to the average person out there on the street, we probably have more of God in our lives than they do. And we end up in that zone that C.S. Lewis talks about in the Screw Tape Letters, where we're close enough to God to feel safe, but not close enough to him to actually be changed by him. And if we can take and actually spend some time, not just tallying the blessings that God has given us, but if we can spend some time understanding the cost of those blessings. And there are all sorts of arguments to be made. Well, he has infinite supply, so does it cost him anything? No, but he has infinite opportunities to spend those blessings elsewhere, and he chose to spend them on me. There are all sorts of things, especially the crucifixion, especially the atonement, that we can look at and go, if I understood that more fully, it would probably change my relationship with God. And I can guarantee you it does change your relationship with God, and it opens up channels that don't open up any other way. And it can put us in a spot where all of a sudden we feel kind of like Joseph of Egypt. He had all sorts of unfair things happen to him. Um, but when Potiphar's wife tempted him, she pressed and pressed and pressed. He didn't look at her and say, well, because the commandments say that this is wrong, I'm not going to do it. He looked at her and he said, because of everything Potiphar has done for me, how could I do this thing against him? And that's the change I felt in my relationship with my mom. Not that I was trying to do things against my mom before, but I felt a different level of commitment all of a sudden. I didn't want to hurt that woman in any way, shape, or form. And when we apply that same sort of thing to our relationship with God, it changes things. So
That is, I love that. That's a, yeah, lot to think about there. Thank you.
All right. Well, you wanted to give us some final thoughts before we close up. Do you want to share
yeah.
with?
The title of the book comes from a very specific experience. My wife and I, years ago, were asked on Easter Sunday if we would sing a duet. We were asked if we would be right in the middle of the program. And we picked a song that we had sung together before. We spent some time working on it. And the week before Easter, I got probably the worst cold I've ever had. I had a horrible voice. It just, I couldn't talk. I lost my voice. And when I did try to talk, it was not sing-songy beautiful. It was anything but. And the morning of Easter, her mom was coming to join us because she wanted to hear us sing. And her mom told me a story of having a very similar thing happen, needing to be able to sing and praying really hard and actually having the miracle happen that when it was time to get up to sing, her voice came back just long enough for her to sing. And I thought, okay, I can pray for that kind of miracle. I can hope for that kind of thing. And the feeling that I had, I don't know if it was lack of faith on my part or not, but the feeling that I had was very strongly, that's not in the cards. That's not what's going to happen. And so I talked with my wife about it, and we ended up deciding that she would just sing solo. She's an amazing soloist, and yeah, that she would sing it solo. And so we told the person conducting the meeting that that was now the plan, and they announced it that way. And the moment that it was time to get up, a voice entered my head in my heart and said, it's not about how you sound, it's about worshiping me. And it's not about how we sound, it's not about how well we communicate the message. As much as I'm saying let's figure out how to better communicate gratitude, really it's how do we feel the feeling before we try to express it? How do we deeply feel that well, so that when we draw water from it, we're not just throwing a dry spoon at somebody else? So like I said in the beginning, I appreciate what you've put together here. I appreciate the part that I get to play in it. And yeah, I look forward to sharing a little more with those that choose to be a part of it.
Well, that was a beautiful story. So thank you so much. I have loved talking to you today, Matthew, and getting to know you more. You've made me rethink how I think of gratitude and how I want to feel it more from my heart. I look forward to being a part of your workshop and reading your book. Um, so thank you. Just loved your message.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
I can say the same thing. It's definitely been a very heartfelt message.
Yes.